Good evening, everyone. I just want to make sure you're all awake. So, do you need an energizer before we start? Would you like one? Okay, so let's do a really simple one. Let's all stand up first. Leave our phones, leave everything behind. And now, we're not going to look at you. Touch your toes. Then stand on your toes and stretch. Touch your toes again. Stretch. And the last, third time, touch your toes and stretch and give yourselves a pat on the back. Well done. That should wake you up. Because Sharmila, thanks for setting the tone. I'm so glad you really engaged the audience and the participants here because I hope this one can be a conversation, particularly because it is part B on the same theme, right? So we are just building on what we've heard. And first of all, I want to start by just saying I'm so relieved and happy. And rather, I wonder if you know why I'm so relieved. One guess. This conversation takes place for the last several years on the 8th of December, usually at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., and I would be going to bed very early on the 7th at 5 p.m. to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to join virtually. So thank you for having me here in person this year. I've just retired, and this is the very, very first exciting, joyful activity on retiring. So salute GSCDM, the Radha Paudel Foundation, and all of you for making this conversation always so exciting, full of hope, energy, and forward-looking. So let's keep doing that. The second reason I'm very excited to be here today is when at the very first conference where I was here in person in Nepal, it was a different conversation. And I see the evolution of this conversation. It is much more now about advocacy and action. I think when we started this conversation several years ago in Nepal, it was about breaking the silence and advocacy. We have to congratulate ourselves that we've moved on from there. The silence is broken, but a lot of action is still needed. So that advocacy needs to be linked at every step of the way to action. And we've just heard in this earlier session about the importance of this research and the investigations being rooted in local idiom, respect for local culture, indigenous knowledge in all its diversity, but also about intersectionality. And always, always, always thinking about scale. I want to bring that back. We are impatient now. We don't have time for perfect 5-star, 7-star projects. We need to make sure that every menstruator and non-menstruator is a part of this action in a hurry, right? Our countries, our communities, and our menstruators cannot wait. So let's all join together for accelerated action. On that note, I just want to remind you that we've already looked a little bit at methodology. And thank you for that very powerful set, those glimpses, because your work is so much deeper. Valeria, Sarah, and Mohammed, for those glimpses of what really rooted work can do. It's really powerful, and especially the emphasis on inclusion of men and boys as motors of change that is inclusive and much, much more sustainable. Without addressing harmful masculinities, there is no hope for dignified menstruation. So that was a key takeaway for me. The other was really, I loved what Sarah said, that the findings are early and we're still processing the data. We will continue processing data and findings as we move along this journey. And our findings change. We have updated information. But let's not throw out really local-rooted knowledge and customs. And it was really wonderful to hear much earlier on, I think it was Florian who reminded us that, menstruators hundreds of years ago used indigenous knowledge, medicinal plants, different remedies that we should not discount. So thank you for always looking back to build positively and strongly forward. We have 3 amazing panelists, and I'm going to ask our panelists, it's exactly 4 o'clock, I think, if I'm not wrong, or a few minutes to 4. So I'm going to ask our panelists who were given a guidance of 8 minutes for their presentations to kindly aim for 5, so you will stop at 6. The reason being that I would love to really, really engage you all in a conversation and to build on the last one. So let me introduce our first panelist, and I'm going to call on Uma Diallo from Guinea. Uma is please come up. Uma is a young Guinean feminist activist and executive director of the Maison du Leadership, an accompagnement des filles et femmes de Guinée. She has 7 years of activism on women's rights, girls' rights, sexual reproductive health, and mental well-being. Uma, do walk up. Come on over. She coordinates the Mes Monstrues Libres Guinée Festival and the Girls Talk Guinée program, and serves as youth, gender, and empowerment lead at M2DH. She has collaborated internationally and nationally and was recognized as one of Guinea's brilliant young women and future heroines. Uma, would you like to make your presentation first? Yeah? Come on over. I'll introduce our next panelist after you finish. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Rebonsoir à toutes et à tous. Je suis Oumouawa Diallo, directrice exécutive de Malaf Guinée et coordinatrice du festival Mes Menstrues Libres. Alors aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler de cette initiative qui, pour la première fois, a été mise en place, comme Florian le disait tout à l'heure, par une organisation en Côte d'Ivoire qui est Goutte Rouge. Et l'année dernière, la Guinée a abrité la première édition de ce festival. La présentation, s'il vous plaît. Alors, ce festival Mes Menstrues Libres, c'est un espace qui a permis aux jeunes filles, aux jeunes garçons, aux institutions et aux organisations de jeunes d'échanger, de se partager les expériences sur les questions de dignité menstruelle. L'espace a permis aux jeunes filles de libérer la parole, mais aussi en fait de partager leur expérience, leur vécu sur la question de la dignité menstruelle. Alors en Guinée, comme dans beaucoup de pays à travers le monde, la menstruation reste un sujet tabou, souvent entouré de stigmatisation, de honte et d'ignorance. Cette situation affecte profondément la santé mentale, la santé physique et l'autonomie corporelle des filles et des femmes, les empêchant pleinement à la vie sociale, scolaire et professionnelle pendant leurs règles. En effet, beaucoup de jeunes filles et de femmes n'ont pas accès à des produits menstruels adaptés, à une éducation sexuelle appropriée ou encore à des espaces sûrs pour discuter de la menstruation. Cela conduit à des conséquences graves telles que des absences scolaires, des problèmes de santé, un sentiment général de honte et d'infériorité. De plus, dans certaines régions, les menstruations sont perçues comme une impureté ou un fardeau à cacher, renforçant la discrimination de genre. Et selon le plan international, des estimations de 500 millions de femmes et de filles sont considérées comme étant en situation de précarité menstruelle dans le monde. C'est dans ce cadre que la Maison du Leadership et d'accompagnement des filles et de femmes de Guinée a organisé la première édition du festival Mes Menstrues Libres les 13 et 14 juin 2025. Alors, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, le festival, en fait, c'est un espace d'échange, de libération, mais surtout, en fait, qui a permis à plusieurs jeunes filles de changer aujourd'hui le narratif autour des règles, de se sentir libre de parler de menstrues sans honte, sans discrimination. Et en fait, lors de ce festival, on a eu l'occasion d'organiser 2 panels sur l'utilisation des serviettes hygiéniques réutilisables, le financement des initiatives féministes portant sur la menstruation. Alors, parlant du premier panel sur l'utilisation des serviettes hygiéniques réutilisables et jetables, l'idée, en fait, c'était d'amener à une réflexion. Parce que dans nos communautés, lors de nos activités de sensibilisation, on a remarqué, en fait, que les jeunes filles, certaines préféraient plutôt les serviettes jetables et d'autres les serviettes réutilisables. Et là, en fait, nous, l'idée de ce panel, c'était de leur permettre d'avoir toutes les informations nécessaires sur les 2 types de serviettes. Et l'autre chose aussi, on a organisé des cercles de parole. C'était vraiment un cadre décontracté, informel, où les jeunes filles et les jeunes garçons, organisations et institutions se sont mis à terre à travers des cercles de parole pour échanger et parler de tout ce qui est lié à l'endométriose, qui est aujourd'hui une maladie méconnue, Florian l'a rappelé tout à l'heure, et la dignité menstruelle et de la sexualité. Et aussi, une exposition a été faite, c'est-à-dire les organisations qui travaillent sur la question ont eu l'opportunité de présenter leurs activités sur la question de la dignité menstruelle. Et l'autre chose aussi que je souhaite rajouter, en fait, en Guinée, la question de la dignité menstruelle, c'est souvent une question qui n'est pas abordée par les organisations. Et aujourd'hui, à travers le projet SPS, financé par l'AFD à travers Equipop, a permis à plusieurs organisations en Guinée à s'intéresser sur la question et de savoir qu'il y a vraiment un besoin en tant qu'organisation pour intervenir sur cette question. Et l'autre chose, on a aussi distribué des kits de dignité menstruelle. Parce que beaucoup de jeunes filles aujourd'hui vivent dans une précarité menstruelle, n'ont pas accès à des produits menstruels. Donc l'idée aussi, c'était vraiment de partager ces serviettes avec ces jeunes filles-là pour leur permettre de vivre une période menstruelle digne, sans absentéisme scolaire, parce que c'était aussi l'idée. Alors, je vais aller un peu plus vite. En fait, la méthodologie de mise en œuvre du festival Mes Menstrues Libres s'est structurée en plusieurs étapes clés. Afin d'assurer l'efficacité et la portée de l'événement, chaque activité est soigneusement planifiée et suivie pour maximiser l'impact auprès des participants et participantes et des communautés cibles. Cette activité nous a permis de collaborer avec des organisations locales, des institutions publiques, notamment le ministère de la Santé et de la Promotion féminine. En fait, l'idée, c'était de ramener la question sur la table pour rappeler à nos dirigeants, à nos décideurs, que la question de la dignité menstruelle, c'est une question de droit, ce n'est pas une question d'hygiène et autres. Et ça a permis, en fait, de changer le narratif autour des règles, c'est-à-dire de ramener le sujet pour une question de dignité et non sur une question d'hygiène. Alors, le festival Mes Menstrues Libres a été une expérience enrichissante et marquante pour Malaf et les participantes, malgré les défis rencontrés sur le plan logistique et financier. Nous avons pu, en 2 jours, briser les tabous et sensibiliser 200 personnes sur la dignité menstruelle, visibiliser la question. C'est très important, en fait, parce qu'au début, quand on a commencé avec le festival Mes Menstrues, beaucoup s'étaient posé la question, mais un festival dédié pour la menstruation, qu'est-ce que ces gens allaient dire lors de cet espace? Qu'est-ce que nous, on allait faire de cet espace? La menstruation, en fait, est un sujet qui est relayé au second plan, que les gens considèrent que c'est une question de femmes, on ne devait pas en parler et tout. Donc, pour un premier temps, ça n'a pas été facile, mais après, quand on a fait l'événement et qu'il y a une très forte mobilisation, les médias ont relayé. Donc, pendant quelques jours, on avait pris quand même d'assaut les réseaux sociaux. Tout le monde parlait du festival, tout le monde parlait en fait de la dignité menstruelle, les médias, les institutions qui ont participé, notamment l'UNFPA, Equipop, le Centre Audace et les ministères de la promotion féminine et de la santé. Et en fait, au niveau du Cape Gap, il y a assuré la confidentialité et la sécurité des participantes. Ça, c'est en termes de défis. Il y a l'insuffisance de soutien financier et il y a aussi l'insuffisance de produits menstruels. Et après le festival, nous sommes allés à l'intérieur du pays parce qu'on avait organisé le festival dans la capitale. Donc nous sommes allés à l'intérieur du pays, dans les zones les plus reculées, pour échanger avec les femmes. Mais les défis qui sont ressortis, en fait, ces femmes nous ont dit, nous, on ne peut pas se permettre de payer des produits menstruels alors qu'on n'a même pas d'argent pour notre nourriture. Donc on s'est dit que vraiment il y a une précarité et que ces femmes-là n'ont pas les moyens de se payer des serviettes hygiéniques. Donc c'est pourquoi dans nos futures actions, on a jugé nécessaire d'augmenter les zones d'intervention et ce en fait à travers le projet 100% uni pour la dignité menstruelle appuyé par notre partenaire Equipop. Et pour assurer la pérennité du festival Mes Menstrues Libres, il est essentiel de renforcer son impact social en plaidant pour des politiques favorables à l'accès équitable aux produits menstruels, l'élargissement du public cible à travers des événements locaux et une présence en ligne qui permettra de toucher une audience plus large. La création de contenu médiatique et la collaboration avec les médias aideront à accroître sa visibilité. Il est également crucial de développer une communauté en ligne pour maintenir l'engagement tout au long de l'année. L'innovation artistique, les retours des participants et participantes et l'amélioration de contenu permettront de maintenir la pertinence du festival et de créer un espace dynamique de soutien et de sensibilisation autour de la santé menstruelle et des tabous qui l'entourent. Alors, pour une question de pérennité, toujours avec Equipop, toujours avec Equipop, je suis pris par le temps, toujours avec Equipop, on est en fait en train d'organiser une autre campagne régionale. C'est-à-dire qu'on va prendre d'assaut les réseaux sociaux, s'imposer à travers la question de la dignité menstruelle pour permettre vraiment à nos décideurs de se rappeler que la question de la dignité menstruelle, encore une fois, c'est une question de santé publique, pas une question d'hygiène. Donc il faudrait que le sujet soit remis sur la place publique pour permettre à tout un chacun de s'informer, d'apprendre et surtout d'avoir des politiques publiques qui prennent en compte la question de la dignité menstruelle. Merci beaucoup.
Give her a big hand. Thank you, Umu, for really underlining the public health and dignity dimensions and really emphasizing that this is much bigger than hygiene. Let's move on right away to Marion. And Marion Ravi, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, is a research fellow in global health at the French National Research Institute for Sustainable Development, affiliated with CEPED, Université Paris-Cité. Her research focuses on maternal health, menstrual health, and gender-responsive evaluation in low- and middle-income countries. She currently leads studies on menstrual product use and waste management, exploring the environmental health and social equity dimensions of menstrual health. She's based in the Philippines and is also conducting a project on menstrual poverty. Marion, over to you. Just a quick reminder that our two very elegant timekeepers, please raise your hands and come in front. These are our timekeepers, so you do need to keep an eye on them because they are actually giving you the full 8 minutes very kindly, despite our earlier discussion. So at 6 minutes, when they say 2 minutes left, please start wrapping up. Over to you, Marion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Introduction is already done. Today I'll speak about an often invisible part of menstrual health, so menstrual waste management. So to briefly set the scene, I don't know where it is. Sorry. Okay, thank you. So to briefly set the scene, menstrual waste is still an overlooked issue in both menstrual health and WASH agendas. And over a lifetime, a menstruator may use more than 10,000 products, which means that it will generate approximately 125 kilos of waste, much of it plastic and non-biodegradable. And in many low and middle-income countries, disposable is often unsafe, meaning it often spills through burning or by flushing into latrines. And this leads to environmental pollution, clogged sanitation infrastructure, but also health risk for both communities and workers. And this is what we can see on the diagram on the right. And despite all these impacts, menstrual waste remain a blind spot in policy, programming, but also research. So the objective of this study was to document how menstrual waste is disposed in 10 low and middle income countries, but also analyze social and economical inequalities in disposal practices, and also to expand the conversation on dignified menstruation by connecting waste to question of dignity, environmental justice, and rights. And for this study, I use data from National Representative Survey for more than 30,000 women, and I looked at how women dispose of menstrual products and how this varies by education or wealth. So across country, we can see a strong diversity of both menstrual materials and disposal pathways. So disposable products dominate in, for example, Indonesia, Ghana, Kenya, but by contrast, cloth use remain very high, for example, in Niger, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Rajasthan. And some countries, such as Nigeria and Uganda, show mixed pattern, and this is reflect regional disparities. Concerning disposal, it divided mainly between toilet latrine and trash or bin. And for example, latrine disposal is particularly high in Uganda, in Kenya, in Niger, and despite sanitation systems are not being designed for menstrual products. Unsafe methods such as burning or push in bush or field disposal remain really frequent in some countries, including Indonesia, Congo Central, or some part of Nigeria. And all of these patterns reveal that menstrual waste practices are shaped not only by individual preferences, but also by infrastructures, by local norms, and access to waste systems. So here, this heat map shows the probability of using unsafe disposable method according to the education and to the wealth. So it shows clearly a social hierarchy, meaning that women with no education and women in the poorest households have the highest likelihood of unsafe disposal. And as wealth increases, we can see that the probability of unsafe method decreases, even within the same education level. Education offers an additional protection with women who completed secondary school, showing consistently lower unsafe disposal across all wealth groups. And we can see here a diagonal gradient that illustrates a clear social hierarchy, meaning that both poverty and low education combine to restrict access to safe and dignified disposal options. So across all countries, several gaps emerge. First, menstrual waste is rarely mentioned in national WASH, gender, environmental frameworks, and disposal is not treated as a policy priority. So most toilet, latrine, and sanitation systems are not suited for material products and leading to frequent blockage and health risk. Menstrual poverty also concerns disposal, so many women and girls lack access to safe, private, and dignified ways to get rid of the product. Social and spatial inequalities in waste services mean that poorer and less educated women face more barrier and stigma around disposal. And also that the environmental footprint of growing use of disposal product is largely overlooked, and few strategies to manage this waste sustainably. So to way forward dignified menstrual waste management, I propose 3 pillars. First, policy and rights. We need to recognize menstrual waste as a part of dignified menstruation, and we should integrate disposal into WASH, sexual and reproductive health, gender, and environmental policies. And we must frame menstrual waste as an issue of equity, justice, and rights, and not just a technical or hygienic problem. So second, infrastructure and services. Sanitation and waste system need to be designed to handle menstrual materials, and that means providing, for example, bins, collection points, and safe treatment options in the place where people actually menstruate. It also means developing clear, context-specific guidance on how to dispose of menstrual products safely and privately. And finally, equity and sustainability. So we need to prioritize safe disposal options in poor, rural, and informal settlements. We should work to reduce the environmental harm linked to disposal products rising use. And we need to promote sustainable menstrual solutions co-developed with users, but also, for example, waste workers. And to conclude really briefly, menstrual waste is not just a technical or environmental problem, it's a question of dignity, justice and rights. And by making menstrual waste more visible, by studying it, by naming it and addressing it, we can contribute to building societies where every menstruator, every menstruating person can experiment dignity at every step of the cycle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. And thanks a lot for, first of all, for being on actually before time, and then also reminding us of two very important things, that menstrual practices, yes, are shaped by culture and social practices, but also by the environment, by poor or good infrastructure and sanitation services. And I think most importantly that there is no dignified menstruation without safe and dignified menstrual disposal. And particularly, you didn't mention it specifically, but the unsaid part is particularly for sanitation workers along the waste chain, where very often the confluence of caste and class and poverty really perpetuate further this whole stigma and discrimination that is faced not just for menstruators, but non-menstruators and menstruators involved in the waste management process. So over to our third speaker, and we had a very, very vibrant discussion of the research in Jharkhand, and Chandan Kumar Hansa is also going to talk about Jharkhand. He is a senior research scholar at the International Institute for Population Studies, Mumbai, India. His hometown is in Jharkhand and he belongs to a tribal community. He's working with the tribal adolescents of Jharkhand and will share with us some of the knowledge and attitude of tribal boys towards menstruation and the practices amongst tribal girls in Jharkhand. Over to you, Chandan.
So good evening, all of you. So she introduced me very well, so no need for introduction. I am directly going to my topic. So my topic is understanding adolescent boys' perspective on menstruation in tribal communities. And I have done this study in Jharkhand, tribal adolescent among the Jharkhand tribals. So let's move to the introduction. I will not give much time into introduction because we have limited time. So let's discuss why I choose this particular topic. So for me, when I was in school, I have seen, or I might have bullied girls regarding this menstruation. So at that time, it was normal for me, like I was a adolescent guy having just fun. So while going through all the things and while studying the things, I come to know that at that time I was having fun. It was not fun for the other party. They were like seriously mentally harassed kind of thing. So choosing this topic is like to prevent stigma and misconception which lead to teasing and humiliating girls, causing their self-esteem. So again, another thing is that the men in India, most of the families are patriarchal societies. So men hold a very major role in decision making. So if we keep them out of this particular process, then we are missing a major chunk of population in a very important topic, and which is a very natural thing. So moving to the objectives of my study. So these are the basic objectives. In this, I have seen what is the knowledge and attitude of the tribal adolescents residing in Jharkhand towards menstruation, and what are their beliefs, their attitudes, and what is the level of their understanding regarding the menstruation. So the basic methodology which I have followed is like, as I'm a PhD scholar, I have used both qualitative and quantitative methods. And for qualitative method, I have used FGDs, and I have also conducted interviews of some of the key informant interviews, like the school teachers, principals of the school. And for quantitative, I have prepared a questionnaire and collected the data through it. And in-depth interview with the IDIs, and the research focuses on assessing knowledge and how much they are comfortable in discussing these, like not this menstruation in public. So the key findings which comes in my study are that there is a substantial knowledge gap about menstruation between boys and girls. Like when I talked about menstruation to them, they were like, yeah, we have been taught about it in our curriculum, but when we tried to ask further questions, then the teacher said that you have taught enough, that will come in examination, so no need to talk it further, or you will study more of it in future or when you be elder enough. Another thing is that, and due to this kind of things, widespread misconceptions and impurity association are there. So I have talked that what kind of things you guys have heard about the menstruation, and some of them told that like girls are not allowed to do certain kind of things, like to do worship, or another thing that during the rainy season it is very prominent that all the family members participate in crop cultivation. So they were not allowed, some of the boys, that they said that for some days the girls are not allowed to plant the crop because it is the belief that the crop planted by a girl who is menstruating will not harvest and have a good, that it will not lead into a good harvest. So these kind of things were prevalent in that area. Another thing is that secrecy feels stigma. So it is like a general perception that if we are not talking about something in publicly, openly, then we consider that this thing might be bad. So if menstruation is not discussed openly or publicly, it is considered as stigma, or that it is a not good thing. There are several other things like reinforcement of stigma resulting. So this kind of resulting confusion mainly happens because they don't have proper channel from where they can get the information regarding the menstruation. So it leads to different kind of confusion and stigma which affect their future. And their source, most of the source are like gossiping with boys and going directly to internet. Sometimes social media or internet can give you right information, but again, that is not a very reliable source. I can tell you that. Directly go there on the internet. So what I found the key gaps in there were the urgent educational need for to inform the boys about what is the meaning of menstruation, and that it is a natural thing. There is nothing to be ashamed of. There is no stigma. There should not be any stigma related to this. And when I talked to most of the boys of the schools, so most of them said that they don't know much about the health policies and programs. So the programs and policies need to be more curated towards the need of the people, and we need to educating boys benefit not just girls but also advance broader gender equality and health awareness. And some of the research gaps in my study are that the interview was done with the tribal assent of Jharkhand only, so we cannot generalize it as for the whole India or tribals of the whole world. And this study is based on school. So the scenario of village, the tribal adolescent living in village might be totally different, or they might have some similarity, but we cannot generalize the study for the adolescent living in the village or far away from the setting. And the last key gaps that I found, that the study that which I have done was not done in a co-ed school. It was done only in the boys' school. So the scenario, the knowledge level, the interaction with girl may have different impact on them. So again, we cannot generalize the findings with the total population. And moving to the way forward, like we need to develop a culturally sensitive curricula so that we can cope up with this, we can eradicate these stigmas, engage community leaders. We need to engage more people from the community who can come forward and take the charge, because directly going from a higher authority to directly to the village level, that's not going to work. We have to we need to get some person in the middle, so who can transfer the things from the upper strata to the lower strata, and the implement formal education regarding menstruation. And last, measure impact and sustainability. So like whatever policies and programs that can be going, we need to follow up with the like monitoring and evaluation of the programs and policies. So yeah, that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed for that extremely concise but very precise presentation with lots of important points. Thanks for really underlining that silence and secrecy fuel stigma. I think many of us in the room who first started working on menstruation about 15 years ago, that time we were only worried about silence. It's incredible now to hear how that has moved on. So thank you for underlining that. We need to keep breaking the silence where it still exists. Secondly, the misconceptions, and most powerfully, Mohammed and you talked about the importance of a safe space for boys. I think this is very important. We focus a lot on girls and young adolescent women, but a safe space for boys and gender diverse people from early on is extremely important. Thank you for underlining that. And last but not least, I think most of you have underlined that schools, since the morning we've been hearing it, Radha, you mentioned it, schools are the cradle, from which a whole new world of aware, dignified menstruators and non-menstruators can be born. So let's work to that. I'm going to join them on those comfortable chairs and encourage you all to really draw the threads, not just from this session, but also the earlier session. We are talking about social, cultural, but also the political backdrop. And we haven't mentioned that enough. So over to you now for some questions on how we can not just disrupt, but shake forever to a new future, to a new dignified menstrual future, our communities, societies, and the world, based on insights from our three presenters here. So over to you. Do you need another energizer? And you can ask in English, Nepali, French. I think those are the three, right? Yes. Encourage you to direct your question at any one of the panelists from right to left, Mario, Umu, and Chandan, just so we can get more questions. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself briefly, name, and the nature of your work, what you do in menstrual health or hygiene or dignity.
Thank you. म बिना सिलवाल
I am Bila Sirwal from Kopila, Nepal, Pokhara. We are working in the issues of women, children, and mental health, including this dignified menstruation. menstruation health and justice for all.
My concern is to Chandan, as you were talking about developing the culture-sensitive curriculum. For me, whether it should be culture-sensitive curriculum or police, constitution as well as human right focus curriculum. Because culture is the things that we developed ourselves. It is different in different society among us inside our country and all over the world. But human right is for all. And we all are, I think in this room, we all are the person whose country is ratified on human right, on child right, on UNCRPD, and so many other international right-based issues. And then at the same time, as we are human being, and we had lots of presentation about the issues of, in general, menstruation, dignified menstruation. But for me, as I am working with the person with the disability and especially with the woman with mental health problem, it is more difficult for them to cope with these issues, with menstruation issues and dignified menstruation. That's why my concern is, again, that whether we should develop the curriculum focusing to our culture-sensitive curriculum, or human right-based curriculum.
Thank you. Very clear question. Over to you, Chandan. And I think it's an extremely important question. So if our other panelists also want to respond later, over to you.
So thank you for your question. And I would like to say that when we are making any policies, the first thing we should look at their culture, for me. And if we look at the need of the human, at the national level, international level, whatever we are following, so the diversities will be always there. So we have to find a common ground where we can not eradicate, we cannot eradicate all the diversity, but we can nullify the diversity. We have to find a common ground where both the cultural sensitivity and the international level of the perfect, or what we can food preference, whatever it is, so that can meet. That's what I think.
Thank you, Chandan. Would you like to respond, Marion? Noting that the question was really, all our countries have ratified these human rights frameworks and conventions, and therefore culture sometimes might be a little bit of an interpretation, or even, I'll go so far as to say an excuse. So what about the human rights that are enshrined in our constitutions, and the fundamental rights in our national constitutions, and the universal human rights? Over to you.
No, it's just to just add something about the fact that, as we all know, menstrual health is like a multifactorial question. So it cannot be just answered for example, one political department or one part of the government. It needs to be like very interconnected with the multiple ministry, and including obviously specific aspects on disabilities, and so it all interconnected, I think, and it needs to be seen like this. And I also think that all the intervention should be as we can see, at local level and be adapted to the context. So there is no universal solution or no universal intervention, but it really needs to be adapted to the context, to the population, to the people you are talking to. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. But I'm going to push our participants to add some more. So that's, both of them have said, we absolutely have to adapt, to the local idiom, the context. But given that our governments and we, as the citizens who voted them in, have enshrined these in our national constitutions, and our countries have ratified these universal declarations. Therefore, what should our approach be? Over to you. Any thoughts? Question, by the way. Thank you. Challenging one. Yes, please.
सम्पूर्णमा मेरो नमस्कार मेरो नाम चाहिँ राहुल कुमार राम हो म सर्लाही जिल्लाबाट आएको छु सर एउटा
I have a question. So in my home, my mother and sisters also have menstruation. All of them have started using a pad. The pad that they use, after they use it, how to properly manage it or dispose it. When we throw it in the river, the water gets polluted. If you keep it in the land gets polluted. If you burn it, then the air gets polluted. So how can we properly dispose this? That is my question to you all. Thank you.
It was about how, yeah. Yes, so I think, as I was saying, the answer is not easy because it really depends. Sorry, I cannot see you anymore, but I'm thinking. Oh yeah, So it's not a question that you can answer like this. It needs to be really think with, I think, a lot of stakeholders. First of all, your mom and your sister, obviously, because it depends on what they can access, what they can do. It also depends on the, I'm not a plumber, but it also depends on the sewer system. It also depends on the facilities they can access. It also depends on how waste are managed in your place. So it's a very, I think, difficult question, and it needs to be think about a lot of stakeholders, but implying the municipality, implying the waste workers, to think what could be the most appropriate answer.
Thank you, Marion. There were two more. Yes, please.
En fait, j'ai pas les trucs là pour suivre ce qu'il a dit, mais je suis en train de répondre à la question que vous avez posée.
Oui.
Alors moi, je pense que pour arriver à répondre à toutes ces questions, ça dépend à qui on s'adresse et à quel niveau on est situé. Lorsque nous nous adressons, par exemple, au gouvernement ou aux décideurs, etc., l'approche, c'est une approche par les droits humains. Donc, mobiliser, par exemple, la Constitution, mobiliser la ratification de la universelle des droits humains, tous les textes politiques que nous avons pour réclamer nos droits. Mais lorsque nous sommes au niveau des communautés, par exemple, dans notre contexte, les personnes en majorité sont analphabètes ou illettrées. Et donc, quand vous leur parlez de loi, ils ne comprennent pas. Et donc, nous sommes obligés d'utiliser des arguments culturels, d'évolution, etc., pour les convaincre que, par exemple, la dignité menstruelle est un droit et qu'il faille respecter, ou au moins de déconstruire les idéologies, les normes culturelles qui sont intégrées. Donc, voilà ce que j'avais à partager. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Florian. Did everyone get this from the interpretation? Yes? Okay. So that's a very practical approach, but it still begs the question, which was raised in the morning. In the name of religion, we have interpreted, I think we had almost 6 examples in the morning, that no religion has told us that we can stigmatize or disrespect menstruators. So where is this coming from? It is definitely not from our culture or our society. It is due to, as many have pointed out in the morning, a patriarchal thread running through around control, right? And interpreting religion to suit this control and power play. So what should we be doing to bring maybe these human rights? I think your question is really powerful, to make sure that communities and individuals understand that they do not have the right to disrespect or stigmatize a menstruator, or to really to perpetuate that around the phenomena itself. Any other thoughts or new questions? Or yes, please.
Hi,
Camille.
Camille. My question is a little bit related. So, in communities, whether it's political, local, or even civil society, there are existing power structures. How would you, or do you, in your work, identify and engage influential leaders or members in these communities as allies?
Thank you. Anyone specific that you want to address it to? Okay, who would like to take that? Let's have one respondent.
I can
Oui?
try. I will try. Honestly, it's very difficult to engage the influencer that you are targeting because sometimes they got other priorities. So you need to show them that dignified menstruation is a priority. And honestly, this is very difficult. But we can also think about finding other argument, as Florian was saying. You need to adapt to the people you are talking to. So maybe you can find argument that can meet their need. Honestly, it's very difficult, but I think I don't know. You just need to adapt and to try to find the good argument. For example, I think about menstrual waste management. If you talk about menstrual waste management, for everybody it's not a problem. But maybe if you find other arguments showing, if you have showing some data, showing numbers, showing that it could be a health issue, maybe some politics or government municipality can take this as, I don't know, a problem at least. You just need to adapt. But I think it's really difficult, and it's also very difficult because it requires money, and money is always the problem. But yes, I think even if the silence really be wrecked, it's still a problem to just put dignified menstruation as a priority in political agenda.
Thank you, Mario. We have time for one last question before I ask. Would you like to go ahead? Go ahead, Oumo.
Alors, pour revenir dans notre contexte, en fait, dans certaines communautés, pour mobiliser les leaders d'influence, en fait, il y a certaines communautés, il y a des femmes, des groupements de femmes qui sont très influentes. Donc, pour faire passer un message dans une communauté, il faudrait que tu passes par ces femmes-là, parce qu'elles ont une influence auprès des communautés. Elles sont écoutées et entendues. Et l'autre chose aussi, c'est les leaders religieux ou les leaders communautaires, qui sont des personnes aussi très écoutées, respectées auprès des communautés. Donc, pour faire passer nos messages, on est obligé de passer par ces gens-là. Parce que dans certaines communautés, en tant que militante ou en tant qu'organisation, on n'est pas écouté parce que ces gens-là estiment que nous, ce qu'on fait, c'est ce que les Blancs nous disent de faire. Donc, pour enlever cette déconstruction, on est obligé de passer par des leaders d'influence, notamment les groupements de femmes, les leaders communautaires et les leaders religieux qui ont une même mise sur la communauté. Donc c'est comme ça qu'on arrive vraiment à avoir de l'impact et influencer les communautés avec lesquelles nous travaillons.
Okay,
Can
yeah.
I just add how you can, for example, comment tu peux faire convaitre un leader religieux ou ces groupes de femmes? Est-ce que vous avez différentes façons de faire?
Okay, so now we're having a very interesting discussion amongst the panelists, which is great. I just want to make sure that I see a raised hand there on the 6th. Yeah, please go ahead. I want to take them first, please. Yeah. Oh gosh.
नमस्कार सम्पूर्णमा म मीना देवकोटा सरलाई
Meena
बाल
Devkota from Sarlai. I am from Child Protection Organization. My question is as follows. This issue is related to human rights, as we all have been hearing. So, in order to make dignified menstruation more effective, we can also bring on board the religious leaders and human rights activists, which is why we need to have an interaction program with all these religious leaders. I believe it might be more effective. So this is just my query. Would it be a right thing to do? Because one school of thought or one group of people say that the women themselves are not willing to get rid of menstrual discrimination, whereas the other group of people say that it's affecting our clan practices, the clan goddesses, and various values. So if you could have an integrated program where we could have these religious leaders and other people, that would be great. What do you all think
So
about
I got
it?
about 30% of that, about campaigns, and would you like to answer? And Chandan, you too after that? Okay, over to you, Umu.
Alors, pour revenir sur votre question, je pense que ce sont deux questions qui se ressemblent. En fait, dans le contexte guinéen, nous avons les leaders religieux et les leaders communautaires qui ont des organisations. Il y a RACPOD, il y a RENACOT, qui sont des leaders religieux, des imams, qui sont constitués en organisation, qui travaillent sur les questions de santé sexuelle et reproductive et de violence basée sur le genre. Et même dans la lutte contre les mutilations génitales féminines, qui est considérée chez nous comme une question religieuse, nous avons impliqué ces organisations de leaders religieux. C'est-à-dire, on les forme, ils nous disent en fait ce que les textes religieux disent sur cette question. Et aujourd'hui, à travers eux, on est en train de réaliser plusieurs activités dans le cadre de la lutte contre l'excision. Alors, c'est de même aussi pour la dignité menstruelle. Aujourd'hui, de la manière dont ils sont organisés, ils reçoivent des financements, ils mènent des activités et tout. C'est de cette manière-là que nous sommes en fait leurs alliés. Bon, ils sont d'ailleurs nos alliés dans tout ce qui est lié à ce que nous faisons dans nos activités. Alors, pour la question de la menstruation, je me rappelle la dernière fois, j'ai participé à un atelier où il y avait deux leaders religieux. C'est quand même quelque chose de compliqué de leur faire parler, de leur faire comprendre que la question de la dignité menstruelle est une question de droit, que ce n'est pas quelque chose de sale. Et là, en fait, eux-mêmes dans la religion musulmane, bon, je parle de cette religion vu que c'est ce que je maîtrise, que dans la religion musulmane, en fait, la menstruation n'est pas considérée comme quelque chose de sale. Donc, du moment où ils commencent déjà à venir dans nos activités, c'est une porte d'entrée pour nous. C'est petit à petit, on va leur faire comprendre. Et ensuite, eux, à leur tour, ils vont mener des activités auprès des différentes communautés. Donc, c'est une question de déconstruction, de co-création avec les leaders religieux, ensuite les déployer sur le terrain et puis travailler directement avec les communautés. Donc, à notre niveau, c'est cette stratégie-là qu'on a essayé d'adapter. Et c'est en phase d'expérimentation et les choses sont en train de bouger.
Thank you, Umu. That was really, really very systematic and helpful to answer a lot of the questions. Thank you. Chandan, I'm going to ask you to make closing remarks.
Just few things to say, like you said some of the really things that we need to include religious leaders and activists. Like if some Instagram influencer just post it and give a hashtag, then it will be on social media and everyone will look at it. So you can see how influence work there. And again, you said that the woman versus woman contradiction. Some woman wants to discriminate somebody, some wants to eradicate it. See, like if we have man versus man situation, they can fight it out. If we have man versus woman, they can, like, we have some kind of, but I can't say anything about what will happen if two women like argue about it. But we have to look what is the beneficial for the human being. So we have to be logical at that time. We have to make them understand who are discriminating against the women who are discriminating against menstruation. So yeah, that would be the only logical thing I would have to say.
Thank you. Closing remarks, Mario? No. Thank you. I just want us to reflect on these two sessions and the messages coming through, that sanitation, hygiene, dignity kits, products, etc. are necessary but not sufficient conditions to ensure dignified menstruation for all menstruators and non-menstruators everywhere. And that really, unless we address harmful masculinities and transform them, we move advocacy to action systematically, action that focuses on dignity with a more holistic approach. Menstrual dignity cannot be separated from the higher questions of equal opportunities and gender equality. And therefore, centering dignity in the menstrual journey and in our overall work, each one of us on menstruation requires a fundamental shift, rebalancing power in every walk of life so that women, men, and gender diverse individuals, menstruators and non-menstruators, walk tall and hand in hand together into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Archana ji.
Big hand to our panelists.
And